So Alice and Brian are two of my favorite young people in town. Brian was a mentor for my daughter when she was like 13, and she was an intern on the very first Obama campaign before he was even the nominee. And Alice has been an organizer in the city. Some of you know her, organizing labor and then faith communities, and now she's in voter engagement. And they're one of those brave, lovely couples in our community who have had not one, but two COVID children, you know, two tiny little ones, really a sign of hope and faith, right? So I went over to their house a couple of weeks ago to see the newest daughter with the big sister, and it was the usual joyful chaos you would expect, right? And, you know, Alice was talking about just everything they were trying to manage with work and life and family, and then the world around us, right? Being aware that, you know, we have all so much fortune and gift, and yet we live in a world so broken. And she mentioned something like, you know, you just feel like every moment you also need to be teaching the girls something about tolerance and openness and justice. And I was like, yeah, no, your girls, they're going to absorb that growing up in your home. You know, when kids grow up in a home where their parents are involved and engaged and trying to make the world a richer place, that's just absorbed into them. You know, what's that little line? Kids often ignore what their parents say, but rarely ignore what their parents do, right? Or I think of a different slant on it. A really dear friend, Rabbi Alpert, who spoke last week, a couple of weeks ago at Torah study, we were talking about our congregations and how to have a rich children's program in a world where our kids are all over the city and they're so busy. And he said we need to spend less time entertaining our kids and more time inviting them into our lives. And I just thought, is that not the most beautiful line? You know, not so much entertaining, but inviting and including. And it's true for all of us. I mean, I've been thinking about all ages, right? Like, what does it mean to decide to invite someone into your life? Not just necessarily the person down the street or the new kid at school, but maybe your lover, right? Maybe the person you've lived with. Maybe your 92-year-old dad decide you're going to invite and include in a little richer, deeper way. And the book of Deuteronomy and our sacred story is very clear about the kind of lives we're supposed to be leading, where we invite people in. And it's a life that's really defined by generosity and gratitude. And the book of Deuteronomy lets be really clear that we know who it is that we're remembering, right? So we are called to remember this God who is calling you into this new land. And when you go into this new land, you're going to be with these big cities that you didn't build, houses filled with goods yet you did not fill, cisterns hewn that you did not hew, and olive groves and vineyards that you did not plant. All of this you did not build, and you did not make, and you did not hew, and you did not plant. It comes to us as a complete gift. And then the little twist, remember too that you were slaves in Egypt, and God brought you out with a mighty hand. And so then after that, you know, after we kind of remember that every single thing we have turns out to be a complete gift, nothing we made, right? And that this God who made us has also saved us, has also brought us back from every tender, tough, broken, difficult place, then it's just a simple remembering these 613 commandments and you're home free, right? But to be clear, some of those 613 kind of, you know, have a little bit more prominence. So we've just, you know, a chapter or two ago, we had the 10 Commandments. And then there's that commandment that is in here again, that's the most repeated commandment in the Torah about how we're to treat other people, and it is, do not oppress the stranger because you were a stranger once before. And so there's that it's kind of like the ground of everything. It's like looking for the person who's new, looking for the person who's strange, looking for the person who's different, looking for the person who's lost. And we, as a country, as we see to the neighborhood and people walking by and how much we struggle, we are getting a failing grade at that right now. I mean, just looking at the news that's been out there this week about immigration reform, the the study that they've had out there about how Americans right now are more critical and more harsh against immigrants than at any time, and really don't understand, in many ways it's not just your basic religion professor who can tell you you need to welcome the stranger. Any good economist will also tell you you need a healthy level of migration, right? Because people come into the country with new, fresh ideas and with bold innovation and with labor, which we desperately need. And immigrants, as it turns out, behave better than the rest of us, right? They commit fewer crimes and they give more than they take, and yet we've got this system, as Suzanne Gladney, head of the Migrant Project, pointed out, we don't have a system. Right now, the backlog of cases in our immigration courts, does anybody know? 1.6 million. That's not a system, that's what Suzanne said. And the backlog of immigration applications that have not been processed, over 9.5 million. Like just sitting in boxes in places, right? And so it's like, this is not really a system. And even when you have people who try to do the right thing, who try in a country which can't seem to pass any kind of comprehensive immigration reform because we don't have a congressional system that works, you look at what President Obama did, right, just 10 years ago, DACA, it turned 10 on last Monday, and that was his small attempt to try to do what we couldn't do in any other way, and to grant some kind of reprieve to these young people, close to 800,000, who are like my kids' age, and kids in their teens, and some kids in their 30s, and I don't know if any of you got kids in those age groups. You know how they're trying to adult and figure it out? I mean, imagine if this is all you know, this is your language, this is your home, you're trying to do all the other things, and yet you also don't know if someone's going to make you leave to go somewhere you've never been that you have no memory of, right? So that simple DACA was a way to try to give people a social security card and a driver's license and a work permit, and a lot of these people who've served in the military and worked and lived beside us, and then of course Trump took it away, and then Biden's given it back. So, you're talking about no small number of people, like about the half as many people who live in this city whose lives are just sort of up in the air, right? And then there's the other part, and I think I've got it over there, the magazine, the kind of deliberate part that's been deliberately cruel, the family separation policy that was on the cover of the Atlantic. We need to take the children away. Remember 4 years ago how we were just all stunned to see the pictures of little children in cages, and to imagine people forbidding the workers from touching the children? And Caitlin Dickerson, who's been the big immigration journalist who has covered the story for over 4 years and just wrote this very exhaustive and exhausting story in the Atlantic that she worked on for 18 months and interviewed 150 people and looked at thousands of government documents, many of whom she had to sue to get her hands on. And it's a difficult read, and the things that come out really clearly, number one, the cruelty and the oppressing the stranger, it wasn't an accident, it was completely intentional. That was the point. And like Stephen Miller and Tom Homan, and when the children were being reunited quickly with their families, they stepped in there to stop that because it wasn't cruel enough. It's actually documented, right? And guess what? It worked, because all these little children, even the ones who were reunited and the parents, they got lasting trauma, right? So that oppression of the stranger. And then the third thing that really kind of jumps out at you in the article is how many mid-level people there were who didn't want to speak up because they had to pay their own kids' preschool and their kids' college tuition, and they didn't want to risk it. And she said when she was interviewing people for the article, none of them would speak on the record. Time and again they'd say, "Can you call me back out? I got to put my little kid to bed." That's why we've got to be with people who help us remember rightly, who help us think about what it means to live in this world as generous, caring people. I know about an hour a week I'm a faithful person. So I like to hang out with people who are faithful, like they've got this stuff bound on their forehead and their arm and their doorpost, who it's just like every single thing they live and breathe is this kind of generosity of heart, like Suzanne Gladney and Alan Looper, who many of you have heard speak and many of you have visited with, who run that Migrant Farm Worker Project. And Suzanne, who spoke a year ago, and many of us are going out to the labor camp again in a couple of weeks, When Suzanne moved here in 1976, she was a recent law graduate. She started with legal aid, and 8 years later, she realized we got to start some kind of intentional migrant camp project for the people who come here to pick peaches and apples, right? Almost 40 years ago, she started that project. And today, it's really an incredible model across the country. Granted, it's a small camp and small grouping, but people got dental care, people got prenatal care. There's 6 women right now in the camp who are pregnant. People got end-of-life care. She's got people who are struggling with cancer and dying. And I tell you what, a lot of those kids, they go to 4 and 5 schools. They come here, they start the year here, then they go down to Florida to pick citrus, then they go up to Michigan to do the blueberries, and they go back down to Texas to pick corn. And Suzanne, boy, she gets those kids and her team and her husband, and they're in that Head Start program as quick as they can. And they're working with the 3 school districts up there, and they do some really remarkable work to kind of help the kids and the parents understand really basic things that a parent might not understand, like this is a parent-teacher conference, and you can go, and our interpreter will go with you, and this is how you engage, and this is how you advocate. And over all these years, all of us who've been involved have seen the number of kids who have grown up in that program, the increasing number are not just graduating from high school, but going off to college, right? And there's Suzanne working with them on their college applications and taking the exams and doing that. And you just see this incredible richness. And I know that Suzanne has been one of those people that I have looked to as a model of faith, not just because of how I've seen her welcome the stranger, but because once I was a wandering stranger from Texas and she welcomed me. I've told this story, some of you have heard it, 2 really difficult times in my life. First most difficult time was when I was 24. I moved up here as a young graduate from seminary. I didn't want to come here. I wanted to be in Texas. Everybody I knew was in Texas. Everything I loved was in Texas. Young pastor, couldn't find a job. There weren't very many jobs for women. And this is where someone knew someone and someone knew. And I got up here that year of my life. You know, we forget most things, right? Most things are swept away. I will never forget the loneliness of that. I will never forget being in a congregation surrounded by people, no one who knew me, and no one who I felt I really knew. And I remember, I'll never forget driving my car down Oak Street and thinking, if I went off into a ditch, I don't know if anybody would even miss me. I mean, just this really deep struggle. And then everything changed because that Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, I went to a breakfast for clergy at one of the historic black churches, and there was in the room another young woman, Rabbi Sharon Henry, and we became thick as thieves. I mean, she was at the same situation, working at the big pulpit where she had the big senior figure, and she was like me, the associate. We were struggling to try to find our place. I think we went to lunch 3 or 4 times a week. Back when there was like that Jake Edwards barbecue, I don't know if anybody, I mean, oh my gosh, I don't know how we went through that, what our cholesterol level must have been, because it was like, it wasn't so much that, you know, either one of us eating meat, it was like French fries and onion rings, and anyhow, we were just the closest thing. And I remember that's how I met Suzanne Gladney and Alan Lupert all those years ago, because they were members of Sharon's Temple, and they had one of those take the lonely new rabbi to dinner events, and they had signed up, and she said, can I bring my friend Holly? So you know you've got to look like a pathetic Texan when, you know, you're bringing in. And I think they probably said sure, because guess what? They welcomed a lot of wandering migrants from Texas already. But that changed my life. And we never know, do we, who we might be for someone else. I mean, who the person, again, wandering down the street, coming in our life, I mean, who we might welcome, and how we might invite people into our life even deeper. Even people, again, that we have shared a bed or a home or a life with for many, many decades. To just imagine I might open my heart a little bit more for someone else. So may we remember this day, right? This day, this city, we didn't build, right? Houses, we didn't fill. Vineyards, we didn't plant. This God who brought us out of a moment when we were broken and bloodied and bruised. and invited us to do what? To just open our hearts to one another. May it be so. Amen.